we had this idea of private enterprise blockchains that are in public. That's the vision that's coming forward. And Ethereum really is the best place to do that. It has the security that we need, the uptime, the data availability, and fees are reasonable right now. It's a good time to launch on Ethereum because things are scaling, gas fees are low.
Hey, everybody. Welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward. And joining me is Preston Van Loon, who is the Ethereum Core Developer at Offchain Labs. Preston, great to have you on.
Yay, great to be here.
Preston, I'm excited to chat with you as Ethereum just had a major upgrade, the Pectra upgrade, and I have a lot of questions for you. What does this mean? What does it mean for L2s and much more? But before we get to all of that, let's kick it off with your background. Where are you from and what's your professional background?
Sure. I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a software engineer, mostly self-taught. Was working, I guess before Ethereum, I was working at Google in New York City, and I found Ethereum in 2017, kind of around the hype of ICOs and people starting to do things and it getting a lot of attention. And I saw projects like CryptoKitties that were really overwhelming the chain in terms of like the capacity of what you could do. And I thought, wow, this is a really exciting project. A lot of people are excited about it. I want to help scale this and get it to a place that really fulfills the vision of a world computer or a decentralized, unstoppable application platform. So started looking at that in 2017, and at the end of the year, I decided I wanted to work on that, kind of like moonlighting. And I linked up with some folks online, namely Raul Jordan and Terrence Sao. We started a group called Prismatic Labs, and we started just building sharding for Ethereum and then proof of stake.
What was the journey like going from, let's say, Web 2, working at Google, to
Mhm.
Web 3? Did you have to learn new coding languages or uh, was it kind of a natural progression?
Yeah, so my role in Google was a software engineering in ads. I think it was like as Web 2 as you could get.
I see.
We had a Java stack, like it's super enterprise, all this kind of stuff. And I would say, I would frame it differently. I would say we get to learn new languages. I was really excited about the Go programming language. And when I got hired at Google, I expressed interest and I said, I want to work on this language. And they kind of laughed and said, well, your background is in Java, so here's another Java job. And I didn't particularly enjoy that. I did like the challenges of working at a scale and impact like Google, but not so much the actual programming aspect. So it was mostly a mix between like a personal interest to have a positive impact on Ethereum and an opportunity to learn something new. I would say that for most of us that started the Prism project, this was our first Go project we'd ever worked on that would make it to production. And that was the interest of like, oh, I want to learn this kind of cool, shiny tech and work on Ethereum. And really, really enjoyed it ever since then.
Mm. My background's in digital marketing, so I know a lot about what Google's been doing.
Yeah.
And you mentioned you worked in the advertising side of the business. Um, and this is a hard question, but I'm very curious about your perspective on this. When do you see blockchain and Web3 with micropayments and tokens disrupting that publisher and advertiser model, the way it's set up right now, where Google is the middleman, right? But eventually, maybe kind of like what the Brave browser and the Bat token are doing, that we
Mhm.
we have that moment.
I think that's a great use case for blockchains. The hard part about this is fraud detection and like spam, right? So if you why Google is taking so much of a cut when they do ads, and I don't remember the exact numbers. I think it's like they take 40% of the payments, right? It may have changed since then, but what you're really paying for is as a website owner that wants to serve ads, you want to be sure that these ads are not going to be like viruses and scams and these other kind of things. So Google has invested a lot of energy and time into fraud and scam detection.
Mm.
And then they have a really, really complicated auction process that's kind of like their secret sauce of ads. So even working in ads, I had no access to it. So I don't know exactly how it works, but you can imagine that's a really, really hard problem to solve. So it, with that said, there are a lot of really innovative and cool techniques that are coming through in blockchain. I imagine that there's some kind of zero knowledge proof stuff you could do where you could have some assurance that the code that's going to run is does what it says it's going to do, and maybe it's like verifiable and like it can only do one thing, which is like serve the ad. Um, and through there, it's a race to the bottom on fees, right? Of in terms of middleman, you have some kind of infrastructure aspect which can probably be solved by a blockchain. There's like even maybe Ethereum blob space would be interesting for this because ads are typically ephemeral anyway. You run a campaign for a couple of months, maybe. So you can post your data there, and maybe that's served by websites. There's a proof that the code does exactly what it's supposed to do. And then the platform fees would be super small. Like that's the great part about
Right.
blockchain is it's a race to the bottom on fees. Um, and another thing would be the payments coming through very quickly. With Google, I think the publishers are paid out maybe monthly, and if there's any problem with your account, they can stop payment. I remember there was a class action lawsuit for publishers they had flagged as malicious, maybe, or whatever the reason was, they canceled your account. If you had any pending payments, like payments you had legitimately earned, they would not pay them. They just stopped. They said, we don't
Mhm.
approve your activity. We're canceling everything, your account, any pending payments you have didn't come through. Google lost that lawsuit, but that wouldn't have been a thing on a blockchain platform. It would have been streaming like by the block, basically. So um, there's definitely a better world out there for advertising. I'm really interested in seeing how that goes because as much as people dislike ads, there's some when you do get that one once in a lifetime, I guess, ad that appeals to you, it's like, okay, cool. Like I found something I was looking for, or maybe with the innovations in AI, there are some like promoted things, but they're more applicable to you. So I'm optimistic about that. We can have an impact there.
Oh, for sure. And I'm curious if to or to see if Google itself decides to integrate blockchain as they've been dabbling in and exploring certain things on the Google Cloud side. Maybe they integrate in Ethereum, right? Maybe they're the ones who make the updates here, even though it may be taking money out of their pocket. But if they see disruption down the road, they make the change. But we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and like in the model I described, maybe they're one of the actors in the system that uses their fraud detection activity as like making attestations to say like you can run this ad because I verified it. I'm a trusted source. Here's the proof of what I did, and so on. And there's some utility there that they would earn revenue from because it's there are more actors than just the advertiser and the publisher. You do have some things in between that are worth paying for, and that's I think would be a good use case.
Oh, for sure. Tell us a bit about Offchain Labs. What do you guys do?
Yeah, Offchain Labs. So this is our company is the ones that built the Arbitrum L2, and we also developed the Prism consensus client for Ethereum. I could dive more into either of those if you'd like.
Sure.
Those are two big things.
So let's talk about Arbitrum, given that it's a layer two, and why Arbitrum was created, and essentially its mission.
Yeah, the mission is simple. It's to scale Ethereum. L2s we think of as an extension of Ethereum. They make a trade-off to say we can go faster here through centralizing the sequencer. Say we're going to organize the transactions at first in, first out. So the first one we see is the first one that's going to be landing in the block. And you don't have to trust the sequencer at any point. You can exit the chain. You can force the transaction to go through. So it's it's a trade-off that's made in centralization, but you still have the same security guarantees as mainnet. The sequencer can't steal your money, they can't print money, they can't censor you, they can't stop you from doing what you want to do. You're still able to do everything. So with that model in mind, we're able to create a blockchain that goes fast. It goes, I think, 250 millisecond block times, like super, super fast.
Mhm.
And with that, you see a ton of activity. Fees are cheaper for users. Users like this. They get faster confirmations. That's that's appealing. If you think about how are we going to make this a real world thing and actually use it in the real world, like maybe example being you're at the grocery store and paying for your groceries. If you are on Bitcoin, you don't want to wait 10 minutes for a block to come through. And
Right.
Ethereum likewise is 12 seconds. And when you swipe your card, if you're paying by card at the kiosk, it's like a 3 second thing. So it needs to be better than that. And Arbitrum's saying, look, we can do it in 250 milliseconds, go super fast. And there are basically no trade-offs made in term from the end user. It still have all of the uh, principles that you care about as an Ethereum user.
Now, there have been many layer twos built on top of Ethereum. I think there's a, I heard somebody phrase it the roll up race or something like that.
Sure.
Um, what do you think happens over time as Ethereum layer one becomes better? We'll talk about the Petra upgrade. And
Hmm.
then there has to be some sort of consolidation of the L2s. So, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, when the way I see the vision of the roll-up centric roadmap is you have a really strong L1. This is where all the settlement happens. This is where the applications that need the absolute um, best decentralization, like everything at the base layer here. And then you have a cluster or like a huge number of L2s, right? And these can be tailored for specific applications. Maybe they're called app chains, and you can call it however you like. But the vision that I see is not necessarily consolidation, saying like some app chains or L2s are irrelevant, so we'll merge them together. Rather, I think the L2s are going to look as one homogeneous layer. So the big thing that Ethereum is working on is interoperability. So when you have this homogeneous interoperability, it feels like one layer. Like maybe it's slightly slower in terms of instead of 250 milliseconds to do some complex multi-chain transaction, it takes 1 second depending on the slowest link in the chain there. But from a user perspective, you would be able to express, I want to borrow an NFT from this chain and then deposit it into a vault in another chain. And I want to buy tokens over here and put them over here, or create a new app or play a game and use funds from another chain. It's all going to feel like one big thing. You're
Mm,
just going to understand, like, am I on the L1 or am I in the L2 space? Um, and with that in mind, I think of it as like a a nation of cities with highways in between.
mm,
Um, and before we had this in the US, before we had this infrastructure of interstate highways, every city would thrive kind of on its own. But when they were connected, that's when the real innovation, or not innovation, that's when the economy like really took off. Like we're able to freely trade with other cities. That's going to be really huge. So I'm super bullish on the idea that we'll have a strong L1 with this interconnected uh, layer of L2s. Like there will be hundreds or thousands. Like I think every major institution is going to have one, and they're going to be able to realize the benefits of blockchain while also defining their own parameters. For a while, I think in 2018 or 19, there was a big excitement around like enterprise blockchain, right? Where you can have this consortium of institutions that would run their own blockchain so they can interop with each other with trust minimization. I think those things will be done on now on L2s, where they're saying we can have our own rules while still benefiting from the L1 security. And with the techniques of zero knowledge, they can do this all in public without revealing any information about what's happening in that blockchain, because that's another aspect that people say, well, blockchains are completely transparent and public. That's not always a good use case for certain users, but there will be solutions for them too. So, I mean, it's it's going to take over the world in every aspect of financial applications. I really believe that.
Preston, I've never heard anyone explain it like that, so that's really great. And I have a ton of follow-up questions. You mentioned that different entities or corporations and so forth can have their own L2.
Yeah.
So, do you envision a world, let's say we use Apple as an example, Apple can do certain transactions on the enterprise level, maybe to manage their supply chain and so forth on the L1. They could create their own L2, and that could be customer facing. Maybe it's integrated to the App Store. It enables, some new features for customers and so forth. And that could be a setup that they use. Like that's a model that other companies can use as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think so. Apple can launch their own L2, and they have the ability to say, like, applications that run on iOS or whatever, maybe they run in their own L3, like a L2 on top of the Apple L2. And so they can keep their Apple ecosystem really, really tight. And that's a big benefit or a big need for them, because they have a really tight control on the supply chain. So they want to make sure everything in the Apple ecosystem is excellent. So they can do that and define the rules and still say to users, your property is your property, and you can take that, and it's an unstoppable application as a Ethereum L2.
Wow.
Yeah,
There's so many possibilities there. And I right away I thought of Coinbase and Base, and how they're leveraging that and how that's impacted their revenue and what they're able to do. So and just like Base, they don't necessarily have to have a token, right? It could just be a L2 without a token.
exactly. Yeah. And with some of the innovations within Pectra, you can natively have like sponsored transactions. So maybe, or your chain doesn't have gas, there are no fees. Like you can really tweak the way things work. It doesn't have to be a copy of how the Ethereum L1 works. You can really define the rules the way you wish. So having the concept of gas or like a payment for gas, it may not work for Apple. But they can enable you to do that through L2s, that have dependency on the L1. So you're able to like force a transaction through or whatever it may be. But when you're actually transacting within the Apple space, you may not have to, have like ETH for gas or USDC for gas or whatever it may be.
Mm. That just opens up a world of possibilities. And I'm
Mhm.
assuming, once we have regulatory clarity here in the United States, we could see a lot of companies start to do this, right? Build their own L2s. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Sony, and I was just talking to Yatsu at Animoca Brands yesterday about this, creating Sonium.
Mhm.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe that's an Ethereum layer two. I'm not sure, but
I
I
think so. Yeah.
yeah. But it's just fascinating the possibilities here and how these ecosystems can be built for these different companies and brands to enhance their business, customer retention, because they could issue NFTs and different things on chain. So it's just so fascinating. So let's talk about the Ethereum Petra upgrade.
Mhm.
What is this upgrade and what does it help Ethereum to achieve?
So the Pectra upgrade is an upgrade to the Ethereum L1. We have I think, three pillars of this upgrade. That being, there's a innovation in account abstraction, and that's like an improvement on the user experience, the end user experience. We have some optimizations for the validator user experience. So these are like the folks that are staking on the chain and actually running and participating in block production and attestations. And then we have some improvements to scaling that come through as like a side effect of those features. So I want to like dive into a little bit of each of those things. Let's start with account abstraction. I think is the most interesting. So what we have in Pectra, we have this EIP called 7702, and this allows normal user accounts, which we refer to as EOAs or externally owned accounts. This is a distinction between a user and a smart contract. So the EOA, being a user, they don't have the ability to run, I guess, like complex transactions in the sense that a smart contract could. So one example being there's this really annoying UX where when you have a ERC20, a normal token,
Mhm.
that you have to approve a contract like Uniswap to move it on your behalf. So when you wanted to trade it, you actually had to approve the router to take the funds and do all this. And that's a two-step process. You have to make the approval and then make the transaction. Now, with this improvement in 7702, EIP 7702, you can deploy a piece of code to your account that's there just for that one transaction and then removed. And that piece of code can do multiple things. So you could say, I'm deployed to my account and then execute this. The instructions are approve the transaction, make the trade on Uniswap, buying ETH at this specific price with this slippage. And then at the end, if it all succeeds, then you remove the code afterwards. And then the activity I wanted to do works. And there are a lot of possibilities you can do with that. That's like the I think the most frustrating experience I've had on Ethereum was this
Mhm.
approval process. But there are other things you can do, like allowing sponsored transactions. So maybe there's an app that wants to say we're onboarding users, and for the first like 6 months, we're going to be paying for the gas for everybody. The way they can do that is you create an account with them to deploy the code, and you can make all of your transactions off chain, and that the app will submit the transactions on your behalf. They can mutate your account just with the permissions you gave them. They'll pay the gas, and that's revocable at any time, and you reclaim your account at any time, and you've set the parameters so you can only do what they say. That's the beauty of blockchain is it's verifiable to only do what the code says. Um, and Pectra's been out in like 2 weeks, and I think there are already dozens of wallets that support this type of behavior.
Mhm.
I actually didn't expect it to be that quick, but we're seeing that innovations in UX already. So that's super, super exciting. Other things in Pectra that came along were on the validator experience side. One thing that was a trade-off we made for simplicity with Ethereum was you said if you want to be a validator, you need 32 ETH to do that.
Right.
And your validator account balance, 32 ETH is also the maximum you can have. So the earnings you make, the interest you make is not compounding, right? If I earned 1 ETH this year, I have 33 ETH. Well, only the first 32 ETH was available balance for my validator to have weight to produce blocks or attestations. That was kind of a blemish, I think, that could be easily improved. And what we did was we said, let's increase the maximum effective balance from 32 to 2048. And we added the feature where you can consolidate your validators. So instead of running dozens of small validators, you can consolidate them into smaller fat validators where the benefit is that you have now compounding interest, which is definitely appealing, and your validator is having to send less messages because that one validator now has the weight of many, and so its one message has a more profound impact on deciding the head of the chain. So validators are voting on what is the head of the chain. So why is that important? The important part about this is it's less networking traffic. And when you have less networking traffic, it means you have capacity for more networking traffic. So it's a scaling opportunity of saying, if we get a lot of folks consolidating, which I think people are slowly consolidating, that will have less messages flying over the network, meaning we'll have more capacity for messages. So that's interesting. Um, we also, on the scaling side, we have a data availability layer. So where L2s and other users can post arbitrary data as a thing called blobs. And what Ethereum did with blobs or the way blobs work is they have a fee market, just like normal transactions have gas fees. When the chain is having a lot of activity, the fees go up. Blobs have their own fee market, their own fee space.
Mm.
And we said it's the same dynamic fees where we're sort of targeting an equilibrium. We want to have three blobs in every block. When there are less than three blobs, the gas price can come down. And when there are more than three blobs, the gas price can come up. And each block can have a maximum of six. What we did in Pectra, we said let's set the target to six, so effectively double the average number of blocks we will have, and set the maximum to nine, just so that we're not getting blocks that are too big. And with that, we've effectively doubled the capacity that the Ethereum blockchain is having for blobs. This lets more L2s come on board, or L2s to go faster and post more data without increasing the cost for their users or the cost for others.
That's great. So, it seems like on multiple fronts, there's improvement in transaction speeds, lower fees. It benefits the L2s, of course. So this is really great. Do you feel this is like maybe a hard question. I don't know if I'm thinking about it correctly,
Sure.
that this is the major upgrade for this cycle. Can there be future upgrades that make things even more efficient, or this might be it for a while?
This is a really big upgrade. This upgrade Pectra had the most EIPs of any upgrade, the most improvement proposals of any upgrade we've had so far. And Ethereum's upgrade cadence is typically around 12 to 14 months, a little over a year every year we upgrade. I think we'll have a shorter upgrade coming up called Fusaka, and the intention with Fusaka is to continue scaling blobs. So instead of targeting six, I think it targets like 48. It's a huge improvement, a huge capacity increase. And I may be misremembering that. It's either the target or the maximum, but we'll have as many as 48 blobs per block through innovations in PeerDAS. That's really exciting. And the fork following that is at least a year away. Let's say like Fusaka is able to get out this year. We might be able to get the next fork, Amsterdam, in 2026. That feels a little optimistic, but these things are working in parallel. So while we're wrapping up the next fork, we're already starting on the fork after that. So I don't want to undersell the capabilities of core devs. When they want to get it done, they'll get it done. So that's very likely that we'll see two forks in the next 2 years, and depending on your definition of a cycle, it could be within the cycle. Um, but the exciting innovations in Amsterdam are scaling the L1, increasing the throughput of the L1 chain, continuing to scale blobs, and working on user experience in that order.
Hmm. There's a question I often get from people, whether it be in the YouTube comment section or on X, and I know the answer, but I wanted to get your perspective on this. They
Yeah.
say, why is BlackRock and some of these institutions choosing Ethereum to tokenize? They usually kick off with Ethereum when Ethereum is slow and the transaction speeds. Give us maybe the elevator pitch on that. Is it the decentralization and the security that's the top of priority for them versus, okay, maybe the fees are a little bit high, but we know eventually Ethereum is going to address some of these with these upgrades?
Well, I think that these institutions prefer legacy tech. If you're a software engineer working at these institutions, it's probably really old code, like Java, really simple and safe stuff, or older, um, because they need to get it right first, and they can't afford to have any mistakes or any outages or anything like that. Ethereum is been online for 10 years, over 10 years, has never gone down. It's really reliable tech. It has a lot of insurance, I would say, kind of like insurance policy in terms of tech, where we have things like client diversity. So not only is there a single implementation of Ethereum software, there are multiple. There are like a dozen different um, implementations. And with that in mind, it says if there's a bug in any one of those, you can quickly switch over to another implementation that may not have that bug, and you stay online all the time.
Mm.
That makes it really appealing for institutions that every second they're offline, they're, let's say, like hemorrhaging reputation or value of some kind, and they really can't afford to take that risk. Ethereum is the safe bet. It also has prioritized decentralization as an aspect that it will not compromise on. We could we can make a lot of trade-offs to go fast, but when it's a trade-off that comes at decentralization, Ethereum doesn't want to make that trade-off. They want to say we can go fast and maintain this high bar of saying we want to be the most decentralized blockchain out there. We want to everyone to be able to run the blockchain, and for those with a reasonable amount of funding can be a block producer. You don't have to be a consortium of miners, like a mining pool. To mine a Bitcoin block, you need like a ton of equipment. Like it's not something an average person can do. Where in Ethereum, they say if you have consumer grade laptop, you can run a validator. You don't need this expensive capital expenditure there. And so for institutions like BlackRock, I think they see this as a really appealing idea, and with the flexibility to say they can make their own rules in the L2 space.
Mm.
They have specific requirements. Yes, maybe I'm sure they do believe in this cyberpunk blockchain vision of like there are no rules, you do whatever you want. But at the same time, there are laws where people are, and they have things like KYC they have to do, and they have to have accredited investors. And while that's like kind of frustrating for the cyberpunk vision, that this is progress towards getting to that vision. So they may need to say we can only let people, certain verified users onto our L2, or they may have, say, like there are some things that are permissioned, um, but that's a flexibility they really want. And they can, just like I mentioned earlier, where we had this idea of private enterprise blockchains that are in public, that's the vision that's coming forward. And Ethereum really is the best place to do that. It has the security that we need, the uptime, the data availability, and fees are reasonable right now. It's a good time to launch on Ethereum because things are scaling, gas fees are low. People who have been around for a while remember it cost like $1,000 to deploy a contract at one point
Yeah.
because gas fees were outrageous. And to do like a basic transaction was like $10 or something. So now we're in a space where even the L1 is pennies. It's incredible. So it's a really good time to choose Ethereum.
Oh, for sure. And as far as adoption in the broader market, do you see Ethereum, its swim lane is more on the enterprise level. You have the L2s, which can service retail consumer markets. But then, you have like Solana and some of these other folks, Cardano and so forth. They're not really servicing enterprises like Ethereum. So are their swim lanes more on the retail? We saw a ton of meme coins on Solana, but do you see it that way, or are you guys going for everything? And I don't know how you view it.
I think that we're all building the same thing, and people are making different decisions on what order to build. Solana's taken the approach of let's put everything on the L1 and put a ton of resources on it. They've made a trade-off in decentralization in the aspect of it's really hard to run. You need a lot of equipment. And so people just use our PCs, they connect to centralized providers. It's hard to be a validator without having some sponsorship where you need a large amount of tokens delegated to you to actually be profitable. Um, and Ethereum says we've got a strong L1 and we're going to invest heavily in L2s, supporting L2s. And they've established that, and now they're returning back to I mean, the roadmap hasn't really changed, but they're returning back to saying we are still prioritizing the L1 and putting the message out there that the L1 is first again. So that's really, really appealing. I think when you look at distributed systems, there is no distributed system that says we'll have one really big fast computer. That's not how it works. You say instead of having one really big fast computer, you have many, many um, less fast computers, like not supercomputers, and then the collective computing power is greater than a single big computer. It's called horizontal scaling. So instead of like adding more RAM, you just add another computer and they talk to each other. And so that's the vision that I see for all blockchains. I think even high capacity L1s are going to reach some point, you're going to reach a throughput capacity that the limitations of physics will not allow you to go any farther, and you'll have to horizontally scale. That's true if you want to onboard the entire everybody on Earth, right? That's like the scale. So the highest scale you can imagine, you're going to have to horizontally scale. You just can't have one thing. And so Ethereum is saying will be the root of trust, the root of security of everything, and everything will orbit around Ethereum as like a universe of Ethereum or a like a solar system of planets, but it's more like a galaxy, I guess, where Ethereum is the center of the galaxy. You have all these spaces you can go, and they're all interconnected through interoperability. Some of them build on top of each other. You have L1s, L2s, L3s, and so on. Like you
Mm.
can deploy an L2 on an L2 and so on in a recursive fashion. So there's a lot of possibilities with that. And I think that all of that surfacing down to Ethereum is a really strong use case for Ethereum.
Honestly, Preston, I've never thought of it that way because I my perception has been these L2s. There's so many of them. Some of them seem useless, but the way you're explaining it, it's kind of like clicked for me, like a aha moment that if you're trying to scale for servicing enterprises globally and talking about a lot of transactions, a lot of companies, and so forth, you need a lot of these L2s, and they're not necessarily cannibalizing each other because there's only so much each of them can do in a sense. And people in different parts of the world, different industries may choose different L2s, and choosing, ETH as that security layer, of course. So it makes sense. I think your analogy of like the solar system and then even corporations building their own L2s, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's the vision. That's the roll-up centric roadmap as I see it in my mind.
For sure. So let's talk a bit about Arbitrum.
Yeah.
As an L2, what use cases are you targeting? What can people do on Arbitrum and, what's been on your roadmap?
Yeah, so Arbitrum, let me say this. I mostly work on the L1 side of things. So I will explain Arbitrum as I see it, almost from an insider. I don't know much about the inside of Arbitrum, other than how it works. And what I see for Arbitrum, or what was so interesting for our team to join Offchain Labs, because originally we were an independent team just through grants, and then 3 years ago we joined forces with Offchain Labs to scale Ethereum. We have the same vision. And what I see Arbitrum doing is they are investing heavily into DeFi, so decentralized finance. We see a lot of innovation there. There are some really, really exciting platforms that are launching on Arbitrum. You can see through the the net inflows of value into Arbitrum is consistently, at least at the time recording this week, has been very, very high. I think that's really strong for Arbitrum. There's a lot of use there. They have some of the best people building this tech. So in Arbitrum, we have innovations like Stylus, and what Stylus is, or Stylus says you can deploy smart contracts that are written in other languages than Solidity, and can run in a more performant environment alongside the EVM. So more specifically, in nerd speak, it means if you write in a language like Rust, you can compile it to WebAssembly or WASM, and that can run in a WASM interpreter, which is orders of magnitude cheaper than the EVM. So you can do some complex computation, like maybe you're launching an NFT and you want all of the attributes to be randomly generated on chain. Nobody knows what they are until it launches. That computation maybe is expensive for an EVM operation, but if you did it in the WASM interpreter, it's fast and cheap. That's a really exciting innovation that only Arbitrum is doing right now. Then they're tackling problems they see through you see issues like transaction spam, where because of the first in, first out model of Arbitrum, it's kind of fair. And you can't have MEV in a fair space. So what people are trying to do in terms of MEVs, they're trying to backrun transactions. And so you see a lot of after like a high value transaction comes through, maybe some whale bought a big token and they had a high slippage. So it kind of like messed up the market. Well, someone wants to come behind them and naturalize the market and kind of average it out. So you see a lot of spam. What Arbitrum has done is come up with this idea called time boost. And time boost is an express lane for those actors who are looking to backrun. And they can pay a premium to the DAO with DAO's earning ETH. And they say that you have the rights for 1 minute that your transaction can be included 50 milliseconds before anybody else. So you get the small priority for 1 minute, and that is revenue for the DAO. And that's amazing to see the DAO earning even more revenue. It's great for Arbitrum and the DAO. And then they have this technology that users can do to deploy their own L2s or their own L3s. They have Arbitrum Orbit. And so we're seeing really cool innovations in gaming. Arbitrum investing heavily in gaming. There's some really cool apps on there. Like there's this proof of play team who's built this like pirate game. The name's not coming to me, but the company's called Proof of Play. And they run multiple, I think they're L3s that settle on Arbitrum, or maybe they're their own L2s, I don't recall. But they're doing some of the highest TPS transactions per second consistently. When you go to the website rollup.wtf, or maybe it's rollups, I don't recall, but there's a site that shows like the throughput of rollups in real time. And it's really exciting to see that one of
Interesting.
the highest performing chains is an Arbitrum game. It's super cool.
Talk to us a bit about L3s. And this is a noob question for me because I'm still learning as I
Yeah.
go as well. Obviously, I understand L1, L2s. How does an L3 or even L4 come into play, and what use cases? Like, where does that fit in?
Um, it's a great question. So an L3 is really just an L2 deployed on top of an L2. So it's another abstraction like an L2 is to the L1, where you this and in the case we were talking about earlier, where this would be great for Apple, where like apps within the Apple ecosystem were their own layer within that Apple L2. But let's say for Arbitrum, you have these app chains like Proof of Play, they're running their game. They're running really, really fast, and their base fees are Arbitrum's base fees, which are lower than the L1. So the more layers you have, the more opportunities you have to compress and batch these transactions and reduce the cost. So if it cost fractions of a penny on Arbitrum, I think I sent a transaction the other day and it wasn't even 1/100th of a penny to do it. If that's what you're paying for your batch transactions, you can run an L3 and it's so cheap that you say, I'm just going to pay all the gas costs for my users because it's reasonable for me to do. You can't do that on an L1. It's too expensive. It's hard to do that on an L2, but on an L3, you can easily do that, and that's why like things like proof of play, they're doing a ton of transactions per second. Every move you make in the game is a transaction,
Mm,
and then they say, well, there's no gas. I didn't pay any gas. I didn't have any revenue or any money on rather on that chain. And when they go to post those transactions down to Arbitrum, it's very cheap. Maybe it's like $10 or something, where if you did it on L1, it would be hundreds of dollars because you're batching transactions or buying blobs rather. But that's the real benefit of that is you're doubling well, it's exponential, right? You're multiplying the gas savings you're getting by adding a layer on a layer two.
interesting. So, is there a ceiling to this as far as how many layers can be stacked here, or it just depends on the ecosystem and what they're trying to achieve?
Um, I don't think there's a technical limit. Maybe like the limit is how far someone's willing to go. I think the Arbitrum team, the DevOps team, experimented with this, and they got like to like layer 7 or 10, something like that, just something silly to see like how many layers can we do. It's
Mm,
like that. If you've seen that movie Inception,
yeah.
each layer you go down, the time moves a little slower. It's kind of like this, where each layer you go down, the fees are even cheaper and cheaper. But
Mm,
maybe you get to some point where it doesn't make sense anymore. Like I can't imagine a need for a layer 6 or 7. But maybe like let's take a big app like World of Warcraft. Let's say World of Warcraft wants to launch on Arbitrum and they want it to be an L3. Well, so they have an L3 where this is like their root of the game where like all the account space is, but all of the realms are on a layer 4.
mm,
And within the realms, there are dungeons. Like if you've ever played that, when you go into a dungeon with a party, that like kind of creates a new space and that runs on its own. So maybe they're launching ephemeral L4, L5s to do this particular activity. And when it's done, it comes back to that chain. And when they log out of the realm, that comes back to the L3. Uh, I mean, it may make sense in certain use cases, but to have that capability is really interesting. And I wonder if that's sparking something in your mind because I haven't actually thought about it that way, but that sounds really appealing to me.
oh, for sure. You know, you mentioned gaming, and I don't know if you can speak to this, but I think the Web3 gaming space is kind of waiting for its Farmville moment, to have kind of that viral moment. Everyone wants to play this game. Oh, it's Web3, and you can earn NFTs and tokens.
Yeah.
Or is it a traditional game like World of Warcraft or somebody GTA 6 or something like that that has to integrate this technology in it for us to have that tipping point moment, if you want to call it that?
Yeah. Um, we'll have to reach a critical mass at some point where we've really made it in terms of the gaming space. I know that these folks are really thinking about it, and there's strong interest to say we should have a standard for interoperability within games. And the more they talk about it, the more it sounds like this idea of NFTs that the Ethereum community or blockchain community pitched a few years ago and it was dismissed. I think they're going to come back to it. I think the problem that they're having to solve is around traditional problems like intellectual property, like who owns that, and
Mm,
kind of like the lawyer speak of things. From a tech aspect, it's it's ready. The tech is ready for that. It's ready for onboarding, and I imagine that folks are already building prototypes and ideas. It will be really appealing to have this cross-game compatibility where I can take my Fortnite skins into another game. Maybe I'm playing Counter-Strike as a Fortnite character. Like that would be really interesting. And that all player bases and ecosystems are benefiting. And if it's really appealing to users, I think it would be really profitable to these games. There are certainly ways that things people are willing to pay for this. In fact, like we've seen a lot of like launchpad platforms that are saying create your own token and part of the trading fees sponsor your project. And you could see a very similar thing with like they'll unlock the items, and then if they're sold on the markets, that the developers are still realizing profits from that. So you can fund maybe it starts with indie games. I actually imagine that's probably what it is because they're have more appetite for risk. And then when you see AAA game studios adopting this idea, it's going to be really, really big. And then when we see anybody do that idea that I mentioned, like World of Warcraft, where they launch their own L3 and then they're having ephemeral blockchain spaces for users, like that's going to be an all in. That's like all on chain application of gaming, which we have not seen yet, and I think that's going to be really cool.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. I used to play a lot of games, not as much anymore. I have a kid now and everything. But I'm still just so curious and fascinated as to when we're going to have that moment. And I love the idea you mentioned where you can have interoperability between the games, where you can move skins and different things. That would be really fascinating. It would
Yeah.
make things interesting. Preston, I know we're up on time. I wish I could keep you for another hour, but I got some wrap up questions here for you.
Okay.
First, if you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
Oh, my own metaverse. I'm big into aviation. I like to fly for fun. I have a
Nice.
pilot's license, so I would probably make a space that's like everyone can fly around and it's pretty realistic but kind of fun at the same time. That would be really fun for me. I love to fly and I love all things aviation related, so that'd be
Nice.
cool.
Yeah, that would be awesome as well. An immersive world where I would love to do that. Be in a helicopter or an airplane. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Rapid fire questions. Favorite food.
Chicken, rice, and broccoli. I like that really boring meal. It's my favorite.
Favorite musician or band.
Anthony Green of Circus Survive.
Favorite movie.
A Knight's Tale.
Favorite book.
Favorite book? Ooh. I don't know. I haven't been reading much recently. It's been quite busy.
And when you're not working at Offchain Labs, what are you doing for fun?
Flying.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Preston, I got to have you back on. I appreciate your knowledge and explaining these upgrades and all the things that are happening on Ethereum. But thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be here, and I'd be happy to come back anytime.